your discussion focused, give your opinions and views to each other, some back and forth if you need it, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So I'm going to give you all the second microphone. And whoever wants to start can start. Let's see how this works. I don't care.
Well, we're going to gang up on you, so you might
Is that how we're okay? Yeah. Okay. I'm a Republican. I'm a common sense, responsible Republican. And guess what? There really is climate change. Isn't that amazing? Of course there is. And we all see it every day. So we're not going to debate that at all. What we're going to do about it when it comes to infrastructure is very critical. If, for example, the city of Sarasota, for some reason, and I can't force them, it's home rule, fails to look at it. I know that the power plants, the water plants, all the utility plants, especially those on the coast, on the other coast as well, are looking very hard at it because it's coming. If you go to downtown Miami, for example, you get these super tides that come in. It's Miami and Miami Beach are flooded. They have to do something, and the state does have a responsibility to help them improve their infrastructure. When it comes to, I guess we should talk about the growth management issue. Many of you may not know, but in the legislature, it was actually Senator Bennett that proposed that because of the governor's wishes at the time, that we needed to talk more about jobs, and you've heard that 1,000 million times, and turn to the home rule issue and let local governments fend for themselves. Sounded like a great idea, except the local governments blew it. And now you have a situation, and as a former county commissioner, I can Bill knows how those battles went when we were there. We were always looking at the state for the guidelines. So yes, I'd like to see the growth management issue taken back into somewhat of the state hands, particularly, you've got Sarasota cities different, Sarasota County is different, the East Coast is different, inland is different when it comes to growth. So like we did with water in the University of Florida, it came up when we were talking about conserving water and getting down to like 150 gallons per day per person or less. Sarasota's like at 90. They gave us a shopping list that we could choose from that was best for our community. But you still had to meet the goals. You still had to meet the goals. So I'm looking forward to getting back into that. If we want to talk about...
Now, let's stay on that topic for a minute. Give it to Margaret.
Okay, when are we going to talk about the environment later?
Well, she can respond to you on this one. Maybe she'll say she agrees. I don't know. That's what we want to hear.
So back prior to 2011, we had this thing called the Growth Management Act. And what that meant was that local governments had control and they created a comprehensive plan. But then the state had oversight. The state had oversight of the comprehensive plan. I think it's just going. Okay. So then the state had oversight of of each local government's comprehensive plan. And that was important because you need some accountability as a local government. You should make your own plans, but you need some accountability. And in 2011, the legislature voted to dismantle the Growth Management Act. And I looked it up, and Mr. Pilon at the time was a representative, and he voted in favor of dismantling the Growth Management Act, which I believe was a mistake. I think that we need state oversight of comprehensive planning. I think that it's very important to make sure that our local governments are doing what they say they're going to do. And we've seen the effects of it in the past 8 years when it's so easy to get an amendment to the comprehensive plan. It's so easy to change what we have made as our plan. And without that state oversight, we don't have any accountability. We talked a little bit about water quality and the environment. And that, especially now, is so important. We have red tide that is out on Siesta Key right now. 160 miles of our coastline are affected by red tide, and we are exacerbating it. The runoff from fertilizers, the runoff from our septic tanks, this is what is affecting our water quality. And the decisions that have been made in the last 15 years in the legislature have made it so that our water quality has diminished. We used to have water quality standards. Back several years ago, the legislature voted to roll those back, and now we have self-regulated best management practices. And you see the effects. We used to require septic tank inspections. We no longer do. And I looked this up too, and Mr. Pilon was in the legislature and voted to no longer have septic tank inspections. So I think that there's a real difference between what I stand for and what I want to accomplish. I want to make sure that we have really good water quality standards, because we have all seen the effects of rolling back these environmental protections and doing nothing good for our environment. We end up killing our businesses, killing our economy. We want good jobs, we want a strong economy, but when nobody wants to come to Sarasota, you lose the economic value that we hold so dear, not to mention our quality of life.
Tracy?
So like I said, I decided to run on a platform of common interest and common sense. And my number one issue from the beginning, I keep saying this, was the environment before the red tide came to our coast this year. Because we live in a very vulnerable state. And I went to law school in New Orleans, and I practiced there for a while. And one of the jobs I worked when I got out of law school was for an organization that coordinated legal aid around the state post-Katrina. And so when the BP oil spill happened and the oil came up to our coast, I then coordinated legal assistance for the people that were affected by that. And at first we saw the pelicans covered in oil and our hearts were broken. And then we heard about the decimation of our coastline, which is supposed to protect us from giant storms, which just a few years we had had, Katrina. And then we started hearing about the fishermen who could not find work. And then we started hearing from the bartenders and from the servers and from the hotels that no longer had any patrons or were no longer attending to the fishermen. And then I've been involved in criminal justice reform for many years. We started to see that trickle into our criminal justice reform. We have to protect our environment. I have a lot of opinions on a lot of things. That's what I tell people. A lot of opinions. But we have to protect our environment first, because otherwise it's all going to be for naught. All these other great issues that we're tackling. And I can tell you, having lived in New Orleans on either side of Katrina, it just takes one environmental disaster that big to impact your community in a negative way and change it irrevocably forever. And you know, I go back to New Orleans and I still see the changes. It never recovered in the same way. It's a completely different community. Organizers that I know that have been working in that community for years, they're still seeing problems. So the environment for me is number one. We need to be, going back to the planning, which we were talking about, I agree with Margaret. We can't deregulate to the point that we suffer, that our water quality suffers, that our air quality suffers, or that we put ourselves in a vulnerable position when the next big environmental disaster comes. So I can assure you that when I get to Tallahassee, this is my number one fight. The environment is our economy. The environment is our quality of life. And if we can't protect it, we are in trouble.
Now, we're going to jump, because this is a jump. We're going to jump to the schools, the school issue, quality, I guess, of the education, teacher salaries, and let's throw in whether they should teach history or not. And you all can talk to each other. You don't have to just talk to the audience. If you want to, if you choose to debate each other, that's fine.
Ladies first this time. Are you kidding me, folks? Are you kidding mean, like, it's like, well, okay, let's get the ball bat out and hit Pilon over the head. We'll talk about some of those nasty things. Not so nasty. Go ahead.
So, another one of my big topics is public schools. I am a strong supporter of public schools. I am a product of public schools myself. My son is in a public school, and I believe that we need to protect our public schools and stop the privatization. I will tell you that I got a bill from the Department of Revenue, Florida Department of Revenue last week. And on top of being an attorney, I'm a small business owner. I own residential and commercial properties that I rent out. And those of you might know that there is a tax on commercial property rental. And it just went down a little bit. It went down last year. It went down again. It's coming down again. And however, I have found that my tenant now has the ability to pay their commercial real estate taxes into a fund that's going to go into a scholarship fund. This is tax money that's going to go into private schools that are not accountable to the taxpayer.
It's not tax money. It's a tax credit.
It's a tax credit. Right. So it's money that's not going into the general revenue.
The person.
Right, but it's money that's not going into the general revenue. If we give them a tax credit, that means they've got the credit. That's not money that's coming to our general revenue, which means it's money that's not going into our public schools. Not only that, I'm required now to do extra management in order to help my tenant give that tax credit. So I have to say, I was a little irritated about that because I'm going to stand up here and tell you, I oppose the voucher system. I oppose our tax dollars going into private education. I'm not opposed to private education, I just don't think I should be paying for it. I went to my husband's high school football game the other day at Bayshore Gardens. We cannot believe how poor that school is. He graduated from there. The band has t-shirts and shorts when they're competing against another school that has wonderful uniforms. The kids did not get new helmets to play football this year. You know, and we're hearing about all of these concussions. It's because the money has been taken out of our public schools. So we're creating a tiered educational system, and it's not fair. You know, my kid's benefiting from school choice. He goes to a public school, but I actually drive him because my family has the ability to do that. But what about the families who can't afford the transportation to a better school, their school that's being starved from the lack of tax dollars? So I believe we need competitive rates for our teachers. I believe our state employees should not have to pay that additional 3% into their pensions, right? That we started to do during the recession. I realize everyone was on starvation rations at that point, but we are in a growth economy now, and the people should be getting the benefits of that growth economy, including our public schools. That's how I feel.
So, one of the reasons that I decided to run for office was because I saw this great divide between what I believe that should be happening and what my friends and my family were saying we want to happen and what was actually happening in Tallahassee. And one of those things was what was happening with our public education system. Florida is consistently ranked in the bottom half of the nation for public education. We increased our per pupil spending by 47 cents, but if you measure that for inflation, we have gone backwards in the past 10 years as far as per pupil spending. That's not right. How are we supposed to graduate students that are ready to be productive members of our society if we are not fully funding our education system? I believe that we are spending almost $1 billion in these voucher programs that is sending money to for-profit charter schools, to private schools. That money could be going into our public education system to make sure that every child has the education that he or she deserves. It's not right. We need to change it. And Sarasota has one of the best school districts in Florida, and I am so proud to live in Sarasota and be supporting our great public schools. But 30% of our third graders still are not reading at grade level, and that is an indicator of how you're going to do later in life. If you're not reading at third grade level by the time you're in third grade, bad things are likely to happen, and that's what the studies show. So if we are the best school district in the state, and 30% of our kids aren't reading at third grade level, something is wrong. Think about the other counties. Think about what they're doing and how they are dealing with the funding. And I'm proud that we have the millage and that we are spending that we are putting extra money into our public education system so that we have really great schools like Pineview and Sarasota High and Riverview and and we're graduating great students. That's not happening all over the state, and we need to fully fund our public education system. Stop sending the money to private, unaccountable voucher schools and for-profit corporate charter schools.
Too bad you aren't running against me. We get along fine. Oh, the spin. First of all, let me tell you that under the Constitution of the state of Florida, every student, whether they live in Sarasota with all our wealth, or if they live in Arcadia, all get the same amount. It's over $7,000 this year. That 47 cents is, you know, dig down into it if she wants to, but it's really not true. It has to go where it goes. And you know about funding for our schools and our school teachers? It's the school board that decides where that money goes in their contracts. And you know, third grade reading, well, unfortunately we had a candidate that believed in that too, that didn't get elected to the school board. But you talk about money, the legislature last year, because they had to, put $400 million into school safety, into medical, we're talking about mental health counselors. We're talking about hardening the targets of the schools, hiring law enforcement or guardians. And my opponent voted no on all of them. Voted no. She voted no. She didn't want $400 million for mental health, right? She didn't want that, did she? No. And she didn't want more police in schools to protect our kids. I happen to want trained people. I was one of the first people to promote the school resource officers in years gone by. Thumbs down are fine. You're going to vote for her anyway. Don't worry about it. I'm looking to anybody that is undecided or wants to get me to know me better. So you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. You can't talk about being moderate at home and talking about all these great things. Because you know what? I absolutely am against for-profit charter schools in the state of Florida. And I'm not afraid to speak up on the floor, because I did before. And you know what? They didn't put me in the basement. They understood where I came from and what I wanted to do. Vouchers or scholarships with tax credits, that's okay, because you know what? Our economy is still growing, even with those tax credits. It's not a matter of having more money for schools. I told you before, we have $89 billion in our budget this year, and they just told us the other day there's going to be more surplus. It's where we spend it. And where we spend it is up to what you feel we should spend it on, and that's what a representative does. They spend it on what you feel is important. And I take that message to Tallahassee. I always have. Always have. So when it comes to painting with a broad brush this Democrat and Republican thing, wake up, folks. This is about you, not about the party. It's about what you and who you want to represent you that has the best interest of this community at heart, whether it be schools, the environment, and trust me, I got a lot of information on the environment. So think about that when you've got these two lawyers beating up on me every day. They're really nice people, don't get me wrong. They are very, very nice women. I've spoken with them several times. But it's time that we thought about the fact that this community, even though we have a far right and a far left, and now a far right, far left governor candidate from this opponent and this opponent, that we stop thinking about that when it comes to my district race. Sarasota, most people want to go to work, they want to raise their kids, they want government out of their way, and most of them are not that engaged in all these things. That's why we get no party affiliates gaining in numbers in this community, and particularly in this district. So let's think about common sense, let's think about accountability, and let me mention about this sales tax thing she was talking about. She's in real estate. She didn't like filling out more paperwork. Well, I can tell you that we're the only state in the union that charges a sales tax on leases. You know where the other place is? New York City. Makes sense? What we have done is we have gradually lowered that, like we have the corporate income tax, which the other side wants to raise. And in doing so, it hasn't hurt the budget because we have to balance our budget. It's increased productivity. One of the greatest taxes that we removed was to manufacturing equipment. We were charging sales tax. Now we aren't. Did it hurt the budget? No. What did it do? It allowed manufacturers to buy more equipment and hire more people. So it's all about common sense, right? It's all about being responsible, and it's all about representing everybody in your district, your community, and the state.
I'll see if I can make this one.
Excuse me, nobody ever addressed the history question.
Well, I'm going to come back to that.
Real quick, Bill, just to let everybody know that the bill was passed last year. It's not particularly history, but not civics and going out in community work, but providing civics education in the middle schools in Florida. It's already in law.
I'm not sure in middle school they're old enough to really grasp history, but they can start.
That's stupid.
But we had it in 9th grade and 10th grade, and but that was the old days. Let's jump to a different subject because it was brought up, the mass incarceration, or more broadly, the entire prison system, which correctional system. We keep reading about it, the issue of felons getting voting rights, all this sort of thing. So just discuss our there are a lot of things on the ballot. Yeah, well, but anyway, you guys are going to be some of you all are going to be sitting in Tallahassee, so let's talk about the correctional system a little bit. You go first.
Sure, I'll let them get at me this time.
Don't get the billy clubs out, right? The batons.
It's okay. That's what these forums and debates are for. First of all, absolutely correct that the Department of Corrections, in my opinion, is an absolute disaster. It has been ever since I was there in 2010. And the reason is that we continue to emphasize locking people up and not being smart on crime. We need to reform our sentencing guidelines, which Senator Brandis and I are going to work on when we get there. He's very up on that. That's not letting violent criminals go. We need to have, unfortunately, the things that have been taken away recently. We need to have rehabilitation programs, mental health programs. Some of them are run by they don't call them religious work camps anymore. They have a more broad name because you have to volunteer to go to them. Very successful, but not enough money. I'm going to fight hard because I was in law enforcement for all those years. We're going to talk about adult issues because we've already done it with juvenile issues. We don't want to have our juveniles end up in adult prison. So what have we done? Well, in 2010, the first bill that I ever passed, ladies, was the criminal citations for juveniles for nonviolent crimes for their first offense. They've expanded that now to 3 with some caveats. And now there's an issue going forth to do the same thing with non-violent adults, you know, they're not felonies and so forth. We need to do that. Next thing I did, and I did it with the blessing of the people at home and the leadership. And that was, we completely wrote the entire juvenile justice statute in Florida. Well, what did that do? The emphasis is prevention, diversion, and intervention. Sure, there are some bad players we still have to put in custody, and I don't believe in these private people running those facilities, by the way. And when we did that, we were able then to promote at the local level programs that work with this youth and with their families to dig down into their problems so that they don't become repeat offenders and so they don't end up in our adult prisons. We have 100,000 people at any one time in our prison system. That's not tolerable. And I'm going to work hard to change it just like I did with our juvenile justice reform.
So in Florida, like we are doing with our public education, we have handed over our prison system to corporations that are looking to make a profit off of people's crimes. And when you have for-profit prisons, they make money when people stay. They don't want to rehabilitate the prisoners. They don't want to make people members of our society once they've paid their dues. They want them to come back so that they keep on getting money. And that is a problem. And that's one, we have plenty of money in our budget, as Mr. Pilon continues to say. We passed the largest budget in state history in this past legislative cycle. But it's about our priorities. Let's do the work to make sure that when people have paid their dues to society, that they are ready to go out and be functional members of society. Let's don't end up with this prison pipeline where people just keep on coming back and we're just keeping on putting money in corporations' pockets. And there's some real problems with for-profit prisons. I got an email several days ago from a friend of mine who had talked to a young man who was in a for-profit juvenile detention facility that had been abused. And he doesn't have a voice. Up until this past legislative session, legislators could not go into juvenile detention facilities unannounced. You had to make a scheduled tour, and then they cleaned the place up and made it look okay. We passed a bill this legislative session to stop that, so that there is some accountability to this prison system. Mental health funding is such a big deal. We, just like being at the bottom of the barrel for public education, we're at the way bottom of the barrel for mental health funding. And yes, we passed a bill that I did not vote for to put money into, we passed a bill, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act. I didn't vote for it for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is because it had a bunch of unfunded mandates in it. It said the schools need to do all of these things. You need to do school hardening, you need to have school resource officers, you need to do this, you need to do that, and there was not enough money allocated for that, and I didn't think that was fair. So I voted against it. And then we have this money set aside for mental health in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, which was a good thing, which is a good thing. But then I went and toured First Step a couple of weeks after I got back from Tallahassee, and they were being defunded by the DOJ. So it was, the money was coming in through the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, and then coming out through the Department of Corrections. So there's real problems with how we are using our funds and what we are making our priorities. We need to take our prison systems back and make them public, not have for-profit prisons. We need to have good diversion programs. And we need to make sure that we are adequately funding our mental health programs.
We've got to be able to rebut some of this because, otherwise it's just a skit. Very quickly.
Well, I told y'all to talk back and forth, but wait just.
No, wait a minute. Let me talk back and forth. First of all, the defunding of First Step came from the Department of Corrections.